So as it just started, I will start with the webinar housekeeping. The agenda is we expecting to have 1.5 hours discussion, 2 p.m. until 3:30 p.m. Jakarta time, and I will do some short introduction on the topic, and then we will have the presentation by a speaker. And then we will have a live discussion with all of you between the participant and the presenter in today's webinar. That's you will see the screen on your laptop or your PC, that where you will see the on your left there will be a slide showing up, and then on your right there will be some bar where you can see a box question, and then uh, you question where you can type in your question. That's you're listening in your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone and the audio phone and dial the information. You will have the opportunity to submit the text question to today's panelists by typing your question into the question pane in the control panel. You may send it your question at any time during the presentation, and then I will address it to the speaker in the end of today's presentation. Later during the discussion, if your computer is connected with a microphone as well, you can also directly speak by clicking the raise your hand button. Then I will pass it to you, but before that I will put everyone in the mute mode. So yeah, we will have a second slide introduction for me. That's in ASEAN, that we last year in Kuala Lumpur, the ASEAN Energy Minister endorsed the new action plan for ASEAN, or what we call it ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. The theme is to enhancing the energy connectivity and market integration in ASEAN to achieve the energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. So there are actually 4 key pillars that set the direction of energy in ASEAN. Under this plan of action, we have 7 key initiatives. Among that, you will have maybe here already uh, 5 levels, but as well as we also promote the clean coal technology in ASEAN. So actually, our in-house study that we forecast that energy demand in ASEAN will increase. And then last year we published the ASEAN Energy Outlook. Last year we published the ASEAN Energy Outlook, where we are projecting coal will be the main energy resource in ASEAN. Is um, coal is still leading the majority share of energy in ASEAN. So you see that through the projection that we have in 2025, that's coal is still leading as a majority share of to fulfilling the energy mix in ASEAN. That's we doing also part of renewable energy, but if you can see from the projection that coal is pretty much still a big share for ASEAN in the next 1 and 2 decades. So that's, I mean, there's a lot of discussion. We in ASEAN and then coal as a majority issue. We are talking about the clean coal technology. We are talking about the energy security, sustainable energy for all, renewable energy target, economic development, the energy accessibility, and everything that's also leading to what we agree by the world level through the Paris Agreement. So a lot of debate, a lot of discussion that's asking about that's the direction for ASEAN on coal after the Paris Agreement. So to comply with that, that's why today we will have our webinar, and we are going to discuss about the ASEAN coal and also the direction after Paris Agreement. And in today's webinar, I'm very pleased to introduce you our four key speakers that we have. First one, we have Mr. Benjamin Sporton, the Chief Executive of the World Coal Association, the global industry body representing the coal producer and allied company. And Mr. Benjamin joined the WCA in 2010 as a policy director and became the Chief Executive in 2014. Mr. Benjamin regularly attends the UN climate and development negotiation to discuss the role of low-emission coal technology in integrating sustainable development and energy and climate objectives. And second, we will also have Mr. Alex Zepentis. Between 2006 2016, Mr. Alex held a number of roles in Rio Tinto Energy and Rio Tinto Coal Australia, with a focus on energy and climate policy, energy efficiency, greenhouse gas management, and product stewardship as applied to the coal and uranium. Mr. Alex joined the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute as the General Manager in Asia Pacific in 2016. The third one we will have from Indonesia as one of the major exporter of coal. That we will have Mr. Sri Raharjo, Director of Mineral and Coal Program Supervision, Director General of Mineral and Coal from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. Before, he was the head of Bureau of Energy Crisis and Management and Policy. And last but not least, we will have Associate Professor Dr. Pino Mekuma, Thai expert with specialty on clean coal technology. He is from the Department of Mining and Petroleum Engineering, Faculty of Engineering, Chulalongkorn University. With that, we have a four speaker, and then we will have every one of them 10 to 15 minutes to share this perspective, and then we can have a discussion after that. I remind to all the participants that feel free to type your question in the question box during any presentation, then we will read it and as a point to discuss after all the presentation. So next I would like to ask Mr. Benjamin Sporton, our first speaker, has joined with us from London to start his presentation. Mr. Benjamin, please.
Okay, good morning everybody from London. It's a very cold morning here in London, so I hope you're all well in Southeast Asia and Australia, where you're all joining from. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks Benny very much for organizing this webinar. I think it's an incredibly important webinar given the role that coal is forecast to play in Southeast Asia and indeed much of the Asian region. Southeast Asia and the rest of the Asian region are really where the energy story of the next few decades is going to be told, and so it's very important to look at the role that all energy sources play, and coal will be an important part of that energy story in the next few decades. So it's very important that we talk about the role that coal plays, but also therefore the role of low emission coal technologies and how they can help achieve the objectives set out in the Paris Agreement. I was in Paris for COP21, and I was also in Marrakesh for COP22 the other week. It's fair to say that when you're at the climate negotiations, a lot of NGO groups in particular don't like to see the coal industry represented there, but we think that it's very important to be there to talk about the reality of the fact that coal is playing an important role, and therefore we really need to focus on the low emission coal technologies and the role that they can play. This is a shortened version of a presentation I usually deliver, and if you would like more information, feel free to ask for some extra slides on that. But I guess to start with, the really important thing to note is that Asia will be driving new coal-fired power generation capacity around the world over the next few decades. Historically, over the last decade or so, that has been very much driven by China, but what we will see in the decades to come is new coal-fired power generation capacity in China largely beginning to flatten out, but at the same time, power generation capacity in coal from India and from other Asian countries, and particularly those in Southeast Asia, will actually grow quite substantially, so that by the time we get to 2040, more than 3/4 of the world's coal-fired power plants will actually be in the Asian region. And that will also require quite a significant amount of new coal supply to come online, whether that be supplied into the region by Australia or whether it be met through domestic production in countries like Indonesia, for example. But that is a very significant increase in new coal-fired power generation that will be installed across Asia. And we can see from this graph as well that that is shifting away from the majority of the power generation in coal being in developed economies, particularly Europe and North America, to Asia. And so it is becoming very much an Asian story about what happens in coal. That has meant that to a degree, people in Europe and North America think that we can avoid the topic of talking about coal, whereas we don't believe that that's the right thing to do, and it doesn't recognize the realities of what's happening in the world's energy mix at the moment. To just dive a little bit into what's happening in Southeast Asia itself, and it's actually quite an interesting story. In fact, at the moment, the power generation mix in Southeast Asia is largely driven by gas and has been for the past few years. But what we're beginning to see is a shift towards coal playing the more substantial role in power generation in Southeast Asia, and that is going to continue to increase very substantially, even as we see renewables and other sources of power come online in the region. The International Energy Agency predicts that coal will actually take on the lion's share of the new growth in power generation in Southeast Asia, so that the share of coal today rises from about 32% of the power generation mix in Southeast Asia through to about 50%. Now, this is interesting in the context of what we often hear here in Europe about fuel switching from coal to gas. And what's actually happening in Southeast Asia is that the fuel switching is going the other way, from gas to coal. And that's quite an unusual phenomenon compared to what's happening in Europe and North America. But this is largely because the economies of Southeast Asia continue to grow substantially. They are really a major economic powerhouse in the world, and they are also undergoing quite substantial transformations. So at the moment, Southeast Asia is roughly 46% urbanized. That's forecast to grow to about 60% by 2040, and as you can see there, compare that to the OECD average of about 85%, there is still a lot of economic transformation to happen. The interesting thing, just as a side note about that urbanization figure, is that urbanization requires a lot of steel and concrete. And while my presentation will focus pretty much on the role of thermal coal, steel and concrete are also huge users of coal, Steel requires metallurgical coal, and concrete and cement require coal to be made as well. And so about 70% of the world's steel is made using coal, and about 90% of the world's cement is made using coal. So while we're focusing on the role of coal from a thermal generation perspective, the role of coal in an urbanization perspective shouldn't be forgotten. And so that's just an interesting side note. But we can really see here the story that's being driven, which is that coal is really going to be responsible for powering up the economies of Southeast Asia in particular. And I just thought I'd take a moment to have a little look at why that is. And one of the major reasons for that comes from the recent report by the International Energy Agency that shows what the infrastructure investment costs are for actually building new fossil power generation in Asia. This is, but the numbers more or less stack up similarly across Southeast Asia. And it basically shows that it costs about 5 times more in terms of the infrastructure cost. So that's not the cost of building the plant per se, that is the supporting infrastructure that goes into that power generation. So in the case of gas, we're looking at things like LNG pipelines, we're looking at conversion facilities and things like that, whereas the cost for those added infrastructure facilities are much less across the coal fleet. So it's a very substantial increase in the cost of infrastructure that's associated with gas, and we think this is one of the major reasons why many of the economies across Southeast Asia, and indeed Asia in general, are actually looking to coal to play a significant role, is because of some of those background infrastructure costs that apply for gas, which is one of the other major sources of power generation in the region, and one of the other major options. When you compare renewables and fossil generation, the story is a little bit different in the context that the renewable generation doesn't provide the scale of power that is needed in the region, particularly when it's growing quite substantially, and the cost factors are still a little bit less clear when it comes to building renewables at a reasonably large scale. So the choice is often made between gas and coal, and this is one of the indicators as to why the choice is as often as not made for coal. And you can see here again from the International Energy Agency just pointing to the amount of investment that's been made in coal versus gas over the past year or so. That's all why at the World Coal Association we think it's incredibly important to focus on the role of low-emission coal technologies, and I'm sure many of you have seen a similar slide to this one looking at the role of high-efficiency, low-emission coal. Many of the world's coal-fired power plants are today using subcritical technology. We believe it's important to make a shift towards supercritical and ultra-supercritical and ultimately beyond in terms of the technology that's being used, because of the very significant CO2 reduction benefits that technology can have. Comparing the most efficient to the least efficient coal-fired power plants, you can reduce CO2 emissions by about 25 to 30%. But one of the other important things is that you can also very substantially reduce or eliminate emissions of the non-carbon emissions, things like SOx, NOx, particulates, and so on, which cause concerns about clean air. And so by building the modern power plants, you're addressing not only the CO2 concerns, but also air pollution concerns, which are obviously a major factor in many developing and emerging economies. And I'm not going to have, because we have Alex on the line as well, I'm not going to talk a lot about, or much at all about CCS today, but deployment of coal-fired power plants is actually important when you're looking at the option for future deployment of carbon capture and storage, because you have less CO2 to capture, which makes it easier to capture, and you also have a cleaner stream of CO2 to capture, which means that it is also easier and cheaper to actually capture that CO2. So the heli technologies that we can deploy today have very significant emissions reductions benefits today, but they can actually help facilitate the deployment of CCS further down the track. Now, these plants do exist around the world today, and they can become, and we believe they should become, the global standard for coal. Here on the screen, you can see two examples of those, the Asogo power plant in Japan and the Ninghai power plant in China. I was actually with some colleagues recently from GE who said we should be putting the Waigao Chao plant from China in the Ninghai plant's place. But these are all plants that are operating at very high levels of efficiency, have achieved very substantial reductions of CO2, but in fact, the most interesting thing about them is that they beat the emissions performance standards for things like SOx, NOx, and particulate matter that exist in Europe and North America. So, from an emissions perspective, these are really state-of-the-art plants, and these are the plants that are being built across much of the region at the moment, which is something that we believe we need to encourage more of, particularly in those countries that are still building subcritical coal. But we also need to help people recognize that these technologies are becoming the standard for coal, and that coal isn't the old subcritical plants that you used to know about. Which is why, from a World Coal Association perspective, we've been promoting the power of high efficiency coal. We recently, early in 2016, released a report on that, and we also released a report similarly looking at the role of coal in India's energy trilemma. We are currently working on two new reports. One of them actually is looking at the role of coal in heli power generation in the ASEAN region, and another one in Indonesia, which I will mention shortly. One thing that I'd also like to highlight is that heli technology is actually part of the Paris Agreement. So, as you'd be aware, countries in the lead up to COP21 in Paris last year were submitting their intended nationally determined contributions, which laid out what they would be able to achieve and what they plan to do to meet those targets for CO2 emissions reductions. Interestingly, at the time, 19 countries representing about 40% of the world's emissions, and including some countries from the ASEAN region, actually included a role for high efficiency, low emissions coal. And we've recently seen over the past few weeks leading into Marrakesh, a number of countries update their INDCs as they turn into NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and I was very pleased to see that Indonesia actually included cleaner coal technology as part of its new and updated nationally determined contributions. So we're actually now up to about 22 countries representing more than half of the world's emissions that have included a role for heli technology in their INDC. So we think it's incredibly important that we actually highlight the fact that heli technology is part of the Paris Agreement effectively, and so we need to be including a role for heli technology in the various mechanisms that exist under the Paris Agreement. Just briefly to look at the fact that across much of the region, non-OECD Asia, which in this case does include many ASEAN countries, has a very mixed role of heli and non-heli power generation. The red and orange colors here are either undefined power plants that are planned or subcritical power plants that are planned in those countries. And then the blue and purple are the heli plants. And so when we look at what's planned or under construction at the moment for coal-fired power generation in these countries, we can see there is quite a mix and the need very substantially to focus on shifting towards heli technologies, particularly in places like Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. But heli technologies are very cost competitive when we look at other fuels, and we believe this is why many countries are choosing coal in the first place, but then why they should actually be looking at a role for heli technologies as well. Also, when you look at Southeast Asia on the left-hand side of this graph here, coal technologies and high-efficiency coal technologies are incredibly cost competitive compared to renewables and indeed to gas. But looking forward into 2035, that story continues to remain pretty much the same, with coal and low-emission coal technologies continuing to be very cost competitive against other sources of energy. And this, along with those infrastructure costs and along with energy security considerations, such as where you actually source the fuel, is why many countries in the region are actually focusing on a role for coal. Interestingly, in this graph, we did some analysis as well that actually looked at what likely costs would be for coal with CCS, and you can see from here that they are also, coal with CCS is also very cost competitive with other low emission forms of energy. I just thought it would be interesting to put this slide up, which is from our report on India, but it makes the point, and we're having similar data put together for the report on Southeast Asia, that for the same amount of investment that you might spend on renewables versus shifting from low efficiency to high efficiency coal, you can actually get more power generation and a greater bang for your buck, essentially, if you are looking to promote energy access and reducing emissions. So spending, say, $1 billion on subcritical power generation will get you about 20 terawatt hours of new electricity, whereas spending that same $1 billion on, say, ultra supercritical power generation will get you close to that 20 terawatt hours, but quite significant emissions reductions. Instead, if you spent the same $1 billion on solar PV in India, you would get very substantial emissions reductions, but only about a quarter of the new power generation. And this is very much, a story about if you want to both increase energy supply and energy access while managing emissions of CO2, then shifting from the least efficient to the most efficient coal is one way of meeting both of those objectives. And so I think that's an interesting thought exercise, and indeed one that we'll include in our upcoming reports on on Southeast Asia and Indonesia. All of this is why the World Coal Association has been talking about a role for a global platform for accelerating coal efficiency, and the idea here is to bring in international partners to work with governments and others to actually try and overcome the financial, technological and regulatory barriers to deploying heli coal. The idea is to try and shift countries off the subcritical pathway and help them go down the pathway towards heli technologies, and we're currently working with a number of governments to try and turn this into reality, and with a number of companies as well. And one example of that was a workshop that we actually held in Jakarta back in September, which we had the Ministry of Environment and Forestry and the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources join us, along with ASEAN, the ASEAN Centre for Energy. Thank you very much for your support on this, where we brought a range of experts to actually talk about the role of heli technology and what can be done to try and help drive heli technology deployment in Indonesia. So I think that was a very productive workshop, and we'd like to actually follow up the work on that in the new year. So that is a sort of thing where I think we can encourage more cooperation across the region to try and look at the challenges to deploying heli technologies, but then also to look at how we can overcome them. And I think probably financing was one that stood out from this workshop that we can discuss a little bit more in the discussion session. But I think my time might be up, so I'll hand back over to Benny.
Benjamin, thank you very much for your presentation. That's highlighting that heli actually is part of Paris Agreement, and I think there is the needs of a direction for the country in ASEAN to switch to the heli technology. For all the participants, if you have any question, please type it in the question box that we will address this after all the presentation. Next, I will go to the Alex from join with us from Australia. That's Alex. Your turn, please.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you virtually today. And hello to Benjamin. I've known Benjamin for quite some time. He does a fantastic job there at the World Coal Association. So what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is I'll go over a little bit of the ground that Benjamin's already been over in terms of setting the scene around global energy demand and where that's headed and what ASEAN energy demand looks like and how ASEAN countries are going to meet that demand. I'll talk a bit about COP21, the Paris Agreement, and what we think the Paris Agreement has done in terms of resetting the global discussion around climate change. And finally, I'll talk a bit about carbon capture and storage and the role that we think it needs to play to reconcile that tension, I guess, between the need to continue to use fossil fuels, not just coal but gas also, and the need to reduce emissions from the use of those fossil fuels. So hopefully you can see my first slide now, and what it shows is global energy demand, not just electricity, but total world energy demand between now, 2014 effectively, and projected out to 2040, according to the International Energy Agency World Energy Outlook 2016. This is the new policy scenario, the scenario which assumes that all current and announced climate policies are enacted, which is probably the most realistic scenario, the closest thing to a projection, given the way that the IEA puts its scenarios together. So there's a few interesting facts to note from this slide. The first, of course, is that total world energy demand is growing. You can see that in 2014 it's just above 13,000 million tonnes of oil equivalent, and in 2040 it's projected to grow to be around about 17,000 million tonnes of oil equivalent. The other thing to note is that if the majority, in fact all of that growth, is derived from growth in energy demand from non-OECD countries. In fact, OECD country energy demand drops between 2014 and 2040. It's almost flat, but it does actually drop slightly, whereas non-OECD energy demand increases at an average annual compound rate of 1.6%. And of course, what happens as a consequence of that drop in OECD demand versus a growth in non-OECD demand is that the share of energy demand shifts from the OECD, where in the year 2000 only 46% of energy demand was in non-OECD economies. Today it's about 60% of energy demand is in non-OECD economies, and that's projected to increase to over 70% by 2040. So the point that Benjamin made in his presentation around Asia, and particularly Southeast Asian nations being the engines of growth when it comes to energy demand, are absolutely correct. So let's look specifically at Southeast Asian energy demand. Once again, this is according to the International Energy Agency World Energy Outlook 2016. And what you can see there is that it grows extremely rapidly. Southeast Asian energy demand grows at a compound average annual growth rate of 2.2%, which is significantly faster than all of the other non-OECD countries. So Southeast Asia in particular, a very strong centre for energy demand growth going forwards for all of the reasons that Benjamin noted earlier: rapid economic development, urbanisation, and general development, which is a good thing, because what that will do is it will materially improve the quality of life for many, many millions of people. So where's all that energy going to come from? Well, the IEA projects that a lot of that energy will continue to come from fossil fuels. So on this chart you can see the bottom three bars, orange, red and blue, represent fossil fuels, that being gas, oil and coal at the very bottom. And the IEA projects that between 2014 and 2040 global demand for coal rises very slightly. It certainly doesn't drop. It stays just above 4,000 million tonnes tonnes of oil equivalent. Note I'm using million tonnes of oil equivalent here, not million tonnes of coal as the energy unit. And of course, gas and oil continue to also play a very strong role and grow slightly as well. Fossil fuel share of global energy demand does reduce slightly. So in 2000 it was 80%. 80% of the world's energy demand came from fossil fuels. It's projected to reduce to about 3/4, 74% by 2040. So yes, there is a growing share of energy being provided by renewable sources, bioenergy, hydro, nuclear, etc., and that's a good thing. But fossil fuels still will do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to providing affordable and secure energy for the world. And of course, fossil fuel resources are by definition an economic construct, and the reserves to production ratio typically remains at somewhere around 75 to 100 years. That is expected to continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. Once again, zooming in on Southeast Asia and coal demand in Southeast Asia, this really is a very, very strong growth story. Now, this is coal demand in million tonnes of coal equivalent. The conversion, just so you know, is a million tonnes of coal equivalent is 0.7 tonnes of, is 0.7 million tonnes of oil equivalent. It's just a standard energy unit that the International Energy Agency uses. But the thing to note here, of course, is that coal demand has already grown extremely strongly since the year 2000 in Southeast Asian economies. It's tripled effectively from the year 2000 to the year 2014, and the International Energy Agency projects that demand for coal in Southeast Asian nations will effectively triple again by 2040. In fact, it's the fastest growing primary energy source in Southeast Asian nations. As you can see at the bottom of that slide, its share of Southeast Asian total energy mix, not just electricity, but total energy mix, so it includes oil and other things, increases from back in the year 2000, about 8%, to currently a bit over 16%. By the time we get to 2040, about 28% of Southeast Asia's total energy demand, needs will be met by coal. So that's a very quick broad introduction as to why coal and gas, fossil fuels in general, will continue to play the dominant role in the world and Southeast Asia, according to the International Energy Agency. What about COP21? Well, we think COP21 was very significant because it achieved three things. The first thing it achieved, of course, was an agreement. 195, nearly 200 countries all signed on to a higher level of ambition than was expected. Now the target is not 2 degrees, it's significantly less than 2 degrees, perhaps as low as 1.5. So that in itself is a very significant step forwards when it comes to the rhetoric and the symbolism around climate change. It in effect ended 2 decades of stalemate, effective stalemate when it comes to international climate policy. Part of the reason why it was successful and able to achieve that was because it replaced the top-down treaty-based architecture with a bottom-up architecture that allowed countries to pledge commitments to emissions reductions, commitments that countries felt comfortable in making rather than being negotiated from a top-down perspective. So it gave control back to countries, and of course nations took advantage of that and made their INDCs committing to various levels of emission reduction or emission intensity reduction. The final thing that it did is that it established a regular 5-yearly process where those commitments, those pledges, are going to be reviewed, and there is an expectation that countries will not backslide. They will not reduce their commitments to emission reduction. In fact, there's an expectation that their commitments will increase in ambition as time goes forwards. So every 5 years, nations will come back to the negotiating table, and they'll be required to justify why they haven't committed to even more stringent and even more ambitious emissions reductions. And the sorts of analyses that those countries will do, and which others will do on their behalf, no doubt, will look similar to the one that's on this slide, which shows that CCS is a very important part of the suite of technologies and the suite of strategies that are required to achieve a 2-degree world. This is another analysis that was done for a 2-degree outcome by the International Panel on Climate Change. It was published in the 5th synthesis report in late 2014. And in summary, what this analysis did is it tested the ability to stabilize atmospheric concentrations at 450 parts per million against scenarios where technologies were not available or were not fully available, and investigated the impact of that on the outcome. And in summary, what this analysis found was that if CCS, if carbon capture and storage was not available, the cost of stabilizing atmospheric CO2 concentrations at 450 ppm, which is approximately equivalent to a 2-degree outcome, would more than double. The costs would increase by about 138%. Also, of the 11 models that they used to run this analysis, only 4 could find any solution at all. Most of them, nearly 2/3 of them, found that there was no solution, that in fact you could not achieve a 2-degree outcome without carbon capture and storage. And when you compare the sensitivity of cost of abatement to the availability of technologies, what you find is that CCS, the sensitivity was in fact most sensitive to CCS not being available. For example, if solar and wind was limited in its availability, that would only increase the cost by 6%. So these sorts of analyses will continue to be done. The math will not change. The bottom line is that carbon capture and storage is going to be required to significantly reduce emissions under any scenario going forwards. And we think that the success of the Paris Agreement in achieving an agreement and a process going forwards is cautious, provides cautious optimism around the opportunity to continue to reduce emissions. And we think that this has probably changed the discussion in many boardrooms. So prior to COP21, the discussion around many boardrooms of large companies would have included a credible scenario, which is business as usual. I don't think that that's a credible scenario anymore. I think most companies, when discussing their long-term climate and energy policy risk, the business as usual scenario will now be a lower probability scenario than a scenario which includes increased stringency around reducing emissions. So the take-home message from that part of my presentation is that following COP21, we think that the need for CCS is going to be more clearly recognised, and we're already starting to see a lot more interest from companies in CCS since Paris in December 2015. So what this slide shows is the trajectories that are represented by 3 scenarios. One is the do nothing, business as usual scenario, the red bar. That's the temperature outcome that we're headed for if nothing changes. If you build in the COP21 climate pledges, so these are the pledges that were made in Paris, we're heading for around about a 3-degree temperature rise. Clearly there needs to be more done than what has already been pledged, and in order to achieve a 1.5 to 2 degree temperature rise, and carbon capture and storage will play an even larger role in that scenario as compared to the 2-degree scenario. So the good news, I guess, is that carbon capture and storage is not a myth, whilst some groups might portray it in that way. There are actually 15 large-scale carbon capture and storage facilities operating around the world right now. These plants are all capturing at least 400,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide each year and storing it permanently. And there are another 3 which are about to start operating. They're constructed, they're going through commissioning. So within the next few months, there'll be 18 large-scale facilities, and by the end of next year, there'll be 21. when you consider the plants that are in construction at a very advanced state of construction and about to start. So by the end of 2017, there'll be 21 large-scale facilities operating, all capturing at least 400,000 tonnes of CO2 per year, and many a million or thereabouts. And together, the capacity of these plants is 40 million tonnes of carbon dioxide per year being stored, which is fairly significant. It's equivalent to the emissions abatement achieved from the installation of 22 gigawatts of solar PV if that power displaces the most emissions intense coal-fired power plant, which is equivalent to the total installed capacity of France, the United Kingdom, and the UK in 2015. So that's the level of contribution to emissions reduction that carbon capture and storage will be making within a year. Right now, it's only about 28 million tonnes per year of carbon dioxide, which is being abated through CO2. Through carbon capture and storage. So, as I said, by the end of next year, we'll have 40 million tonnes of carbon dioxide being captured and permanently stored through CCS projects, which is a significant achievement. However, looking forwards, in order to achieve a 2-degree world, that needs to increase by about a factor of 100, which is an enormous challenge. And about 70% of that carbon dioxide needs to be captured in non-OECD economies, which of course shouldn't be surprising because most of the growth, in fact all of the growth in energy demand and use of coal and gas and the emissions from the use of fossil fuels is going to occur in non-OECD countries. So if we are going to stabilise the climate, we all need to very urgently commit to the policies that are necessary to provide the same sorts of incentives for investment in carbon capture and storage that currently exist for investment in other low emission technologies, particularly renewable energy. So I'll end the presentation there, and happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.
Yes, Alex. Thank you very much for your presentation. That's highlighting how actually that CCS is needed to fill the gap to achieve the 2-degree target that we have under the Paris Agreement. That's very interesting. But now we are go to the perspective of the national context that we will hear. We have 2 countries here. We start with Indonesia, Mr. Sri Harjoko, and then talking about the coal and then the plan of electricity. I'm sitting to Pak Sri, and then your time, Pak. Pak Sri, you can start your presentation, unmute your mic.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the interruption. Well, this afternoon I would like to talk about the Indonesia 35 gigawatts electricity plant, which is actually the government project started in 2015 by the government. And first of all, I would like to highlight the the growth of electricity demand in Indonesia. So in this picture, you may see that we divide into three regions. First is on your left is Sumatra region, which is from 2015 to 2024. It means that about 8 years from now on, it will be more than doubled in Sumatra. And then in JB is Jawa Bali. It's almost double as well. So during the next 8 years, maybe the trend is that average growth to 7.8%. And then the rest, the eastern Indonesia, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, Nusa Tenggara, Maluku, and Papua, it's more than doubled, I think, in the next 8 years. And the growth rate is about 11.1%. So overall, Indonesia will grow about 8.7% from 2015 to 2020. Yeah, 24, sorry. And then this is the progress of the 35 gigawatt project. So basically here you may see that mostly still in construction, and then some already in contract already signed but not yet in construction, and then a very small amount is already in commercial stage, especially in Sulawesi and in Nusa Tenggara, the blue one. It's very small. So we believe that, at the end, maybe we are pretty sure that most of this project is still on the right track. Even to now, government realized that it might be not 100%, but at least we are still in positive ways. This is the demand of the coal-fired power plant for the next 4 years from now on. As you may see that here, increase all the time, getting higher and higher from only 34.4, and then in the 2020 it will be almost 180 million tons dedicated for power plant. The total production of Indonesia at the end of 2020 is 400 million tons. So I mean, this number is around, how much is that? Almost 50%. Almost 50% is dedicated for coal-fired power plant. And then if we have a look at the electricity project in Indonesia, basically from 2006, the government already initiated what we call it fast track program. It's a 10,000 megawatts program for electricity, and some of them already in commercial. It's more than 7.4 gigawatts already in commercial, while the others around 2.5 is still ongoing. You may see here from the fast track 1 and then fast track 2, another 20 gigawatts launched in 2010. So in total now we are having 7 gigawatts still ongoing, and then some of the FTP2 is transferred to the 35 gigawatts. It's around 10,000 megawatts. And then the real initial project started in 2015 is actually around 26 gigawatts. So in total, we will have 42 gigawatts when it will be finished by the end of 2019. This is the what we call the framework of the electricity project in Indonesia. Of course, there are some delay in the operation of some project, especially for the FTP2, which is mostly coming from the geothermal based power plant. Next is about the composition of the use of sources of energy in the 35 gigawatts project. You may see here on your left that 55% of the 35 gigawatt projects come from the coal, so almost 20 gigawatts from coal, and then 36% come from gas, steam power, while the others only 9%. 9% mostly from the new and renewable energy. From the composition of who will build the power plant, PLN will build only 2.1 gigawatts, while the independent power producer will build around 17.6 gigawatts. And we are still committed to add another 46 gigawatt to increase the electricity ratio by 95% by 2019. Next one is about the role of coal itself. As you may see here that coal is still very dominant, as Mr. Benjamin said, that coal will drive the economy actually, especially for the power plant. Here you may see that compounded annual growth rate CAGR is about 10% from 2016 until 2025. So during the 10 years, the growth is 10%. And 35 gigawatt itself only until 2020, and then the rest will continue with another project. And if you have a look at the end, at the 2025, renewable energy contribute 30%, and then coal itself is very big. It's around 46% from the installed capacity composition. And this is for the coal requirement for coal-fired power plant. So from until 2015, the growth rate is about 21%, and then another 21% over the next 5 years. But as Mr. Benjamin and Mr. Alex said, that of course we will do our best to push or to encourage the private company as well as the PLN, the state-owned company, to apply the cleaner technology for the coal-fired power plant. Well, I think that's all I can share to you. Thank you very much. I hope it's useful for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Sri. That's highlighting that indeed coal is playing a big role now, and then expecting to continue to playing a big role in Indonesia. That's about 57% or almost 60% from the 35 gigawatt electricity project is expecting to coming from coal. Okay, thank you, Pak Sri. And then we the last speaker is coming from Thailand, as also one of major country in ASEAN is pursuing coal in the fuel plant. And then I will pass to Dr. Pino to run the slide. That's I will do the slide for the Dr. Pino. Dr. Pino, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My presentation would be quick. Our situation is different from Indonesia, because in Thailand we have some problem to build new coal-fired power plants. That's why I make a presentation on Thai PDP and coal dilemma. Right, my content would be a general situation on socio-economy and energy, government policy on electricity sector, current and projected energy mix and power mix, energy production, consumption, export, import, and main highlight on coal, and then coal dilemma in Thailand. Next slide, please. Benny, would you help me to change the slide, because I use iPad, with which I cannot write. Thank you. Next slide. please. Next, please. Next, please. Next slide, please. Right. Next, please. Oh, previous, please. Sorry. Previous. Okay. Next. Right, government policy on electricity sector in Thailand. We have 5 major plans. The first one will be Power Development Plan, we call PDP 2015. Yes, second is Energy Efficiency Development Plan, or EEDP. Third, with Alternative Energy Development Plan, AEDP. Number 4, Gas Procurement and Management Plan. And then number 5, Oil Management Plan. Next, please. Thailand Power Development Plan, or PDP 2015. The objectives is to secure the energy supply in both generation and transmission system, both national and regional level. And then next would be fuel diversification. Reduce share of natural gas in general mix. At the moment, Thailand rely on nearly 70% of natural gas in the energy mix. And that's why the Thai government want to increase coal share for power generation and limit power import from neighboring countries to 20% of generation mix by 2036. And then to promote more renewable for power generation. And then lastly, to promote nuclear for power generation. Number 3 is maintain reserve margin to be at least 50% of annual peak demand. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. This is our PDP 2015. At the moment, we import about 7% of hydro power from neighboring country Laos, and then we expect to increase up to between 15 and 20% in the next 10 and 20 years. We want the clean coal technologies, including clean coal, including lignite. At the moment, the share is only 20%. We want to increase a bit, not much, up to 20% in the next in our plan. Renewable at the moment 8%, and then as the policy of the government, we want to increase more and more, up to 20%. Natural gas at the moment 64%. Sometimes it's 7. This year is around 70%. We want to reduce natural gas to be finally would be around 30–40%, because we heavily rely on natural gas for power generation. And nuclear is a long way to go, but we plan about 5%. And then the fuel, diesel or fuel oil, we want to use very few on this. Next slide, please. Yeah, at the moment, as you can see, previous slide, please. We want to increase coal only 20%, up to 25. That's the aim. This is our aim. Next, please. Next. At the moment, we have current and project energy mix and power mix, which is our total capacity of power generation is about 35,000 megawatt at the moment. Which produced by IPP and then EGAT, Electric Generating Authority of Thailand, and then we have import and then SPP producer. Next slide, please. Right. If you compare to the world, 40% is power depend on coal for power generation, right? 20% for gas. Different story in Thailand. We have only 20% for coal, and then last year is nearly 70% on natural gas. Next slide, please. Next, please. Benny, next. Right, when we compare with other ASEAN countries, you see at, if I'm not wrong, in Indonesia is around coal share in power mix is nearly 60%, Philippines 47, Malaysia 42, Vietnam 35. In Thailand, we are small amount, only 20% at the moment. Next, please. And this is our power development plan focused on coal lignite. At the moment, we have the total capacity is around less than 5,000 megawatt for from coal and lignite. And then this is a plan. We have a memo retirement number 4 to number 7, which is be replaced by the new USC coal-fired power plant. And then we have at the moment, we try to construct one power plant in Krabi in 2019. EGAT Clean Coal at Krabi to 2019, which is around 800 megawatt. At the moment, it's been protested by NGO in Thailand. And then another project, hopefully that would be successful, is another EGAT Clean Coal number 4 and number 5, which will begin in 2013 and 2033 and 2034, which is on the southern part of Thailand. Next, please. Next, this is energy production and consumption of export import of coal. Mainly, our coal-fired power plant is from EGAT Memo Mines, Electric Generating Authority of Thailand. And then the others, domestic is not much. This is those others coal or lignite that's for industry within the country. Next slide, please. This is the import of coal. At the moment, we import more than 20 million tons of coal, mostly from Indonesia, some from Australia. Next slide, please. Lignite in Thailand, nearly 90% is for electricity generation at Memo coal-fired power plant, and industry only 30%. But for the import coal, which account for around 20 million tons, 60% for coal-fired power plant, and the rest is from industry. Next, please. You may notice that since NGOs in Thailand quite successful in the protest of coal-fired power plant in Thailand, most of imported coal from abroad about 50% used in power generation, but mostly you can notice that our industry use more and more coal. You know why? Because less protest from NGO for coal use in industry in Thailand. But for the power generation, they a strong protest on the power generation. They anti-coal everywhere in Thailand. Next, please. Next slide, please. This is the domestic coal-fired power plant at Memo mines. We produce around 16-17 million tons per year to supply the mine mouth coal-fired power plant. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, you see, it just only last week that the government reached a decision after reconsideration complaints from Safe Anaman from coal and environmental group complaining against the coal-fired power plant. This is just last week. It happened last week. They protest very strongly, and then since the government want to please those NGOs, the Prayut Chan-o-cha, the Prime Minister, declare the delay of this Krabi coal-fired power plant project, southern part of Thailand. Next, please. Next slide, please. This is the Prime Minister put Krabi coal-fired power plant project on hold, brought an end to the protest outside government house last night. That's only happened just last week. Next. Yeah, and then it's all over. Any coal-fired power plant in Thailand been protested by NGOs. That's the problem here. We cannot. We plan to increase the in the past. We plan to try to increase the coal power mix from 20 to 40%. That's the world average, but it fails. That's a problem here. Okay, thank you very much for. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pino, for your presentation on the Thailand PDP and the coal dilemma. That I saw there is a protest from the local for challenging the installment on the coal plan. Yeah, thanks all the fifth speaker for your excellent presentation. I know we are open for the discussion. That during the session I received a number of questions from our participants. That I think we can start with Benjamin first. That there is some question asking about the call and the direction after the Paris Agreement. That's Benjamin. Can you respond to that? Benjamin, can you respond to the?
Yeah. So yes. So the question that I received was, as other parts of the world are shifting from coal to natural gas, which is considered the cleaner fossil fuel, a lot of them are shifting to renewable energy. But Southeast Asia is making a different direction. Is that a costly mistake? That was the question. The point I think that we've seen, particularly from the two speakers from Indonesia and Thailand, is that the energy mix in Southeast Asia, like it is elsewhere in the world, is going to be diverse. So in many cases, all sources of energy are actually growing. And it just so happens that in Southeast Asia, much of the increase is driven by coal. And there are good reasons for that. There are reasons around the need to improve electrification, to improve reliability in the energy supply, electricity supply, and because of other considerations such as resource availability and the scale of power generation required. And so I think what we're seeing is the decision is being made for a range of those factors that coal is the sensible choice to make in Southeast Asia in many cases. And so I certainly don't think it's a costly mistake because it brings quite substantial benefits with it as well by providing affordable, reliable, accessible, and scalable new power generation, which will help drive economic development. And I think that's obviously very important. There was another question, Benny, that was just in relation to what is the strategy to decrease the installation cost of clean coal technology, CCT, and how does the WCA contribute to that? Well, cleaner coal technology comes in two parts. The first being the high efficiency, low emissions plants, and the second being carbon capture and storage. From the perspective of the high efficiency, low emissions plants, I think one of the major costs today is actually the cost of finance and the access to that finance. And what we're doing at the World Coal Association is trying to promote the role that these technologies play in the Paris Agreement so that it becomes easier to access finance for building these plants. It's interesting to note that historically there's been an assumption that high efficiency plants are more expensive to build from a capital perspective, which can be true, although recent evidence is beginning to show that with the experience that's been built up in building these plants and the fact that they are now becoming the default plant, the capital costs are actually beginning to come down in comparison to subcritical plants, and so that's interesting. But we also need to look at the lifetime cost of these plants, and particularly when you look at an ultra supercritical plant, because it is so efficient, it actually has reduced fuel costs. So while the upfront capital costs might be more expensive, and that's becoming less the case, but while it might be, the lifetime fuel costs are actually substantially less, which makes the lifetime cost of the plant lower than potentially a subcritical plant. So that's just another interesting fact to consider. But the more we build these plants, the more experience we have with them, and the more the cost will come down. And that is also, and Alex can comment on this more from a CCS perspective, but that is also the case with CCS. We need to be doing more of those plants so that we can get more learnings about them and learn how to reduce the costs. And that's why the large-scale projects that are operating in the US, for example, on coal, will provide some really valuable learnings as to how to bring down those costs in the future.
Benjamin, thank you very much. That's issue on cost is very much the interesting thing, and I think it's a lead for the following question to the Alex, asking that cost on CCS is something that's we don't see it will be reduced in the near future. There's a question that's Alex, can you take in the question that raised by our participant that I passed to you before?
Yeah, of course. Look, it's a very, very good question. The question is that the cost of CCS is still very expensive for ASEAN. The technology is not yet in the region, so why should we do CCS? Why not just simply focus on reducing renewable energy costs? Suppose more renewable energy to achieve 2 degrees has lower costs than carbon capture and storage. So the premise of the question is that CCS is more expensive, is not competitive with renewable energy, and that might have been the case a decade ago, but it actually isn't the case anymore. Carbon capture and storage is actually very competitive with renewable energy technologies, but unfortunately carbon capture and storage doesn't get any of the subsidies that renewable energy gets, hence it hasn't been deployed at the same rate as renewable energy. So let me give you some numbers. There's been some analysis done here for retrofit of carbon capture and storage to old brown coal power plants here in the state of Victoria, and the cost of power generated from those plants with CCS retrofitted would be around about $100 a megawatt hour. Now that's clearly a lot more expensive than coal-fired power plants without CCS, but compared to renewable energy technologies, if you've got a good wind resource, onshore wind resource, they can produce power very cheaply, probably at $70 odd a megawatt hour, $90 a megawatt hour, something like that. If you're talking about solar PV, you're looking at $200 a megawatt hour. So the simple fact is that the cost of CCS, like the cost of renewables, will depend on where you are, will depend upon the resource that you have, both in terms of your fuel resource and your sequestration resource and your proximity to the sequestration resource. So there'll be a range of costs that CCS will cost, just as there is a range of costs for renewable energy costs. In some places, CCS will make the most sense. In some places, renewable energy will make the most sense. And in others, nuclear will make the most sense. And we need to be choosing the lowest cost option in every situation. The other factor, of course, which is important, is that of energy security. Coal plays a very strong role, and gas play a very strong role in providing energy security to nations. Nations' energy strategies all have energy security as the top priority, and that's why they are depending upon fossil fuels, because they are relatively low cost, particularly coal, which also has very stable cost. The cost is not volatile, and also available from a very broad range of suppliers. So first priority is you must keep the lights on. Second priority will be cost and reducing emissions. The other factor on cost that I should come back to is, in fact, what often happens is people only compare the cost of generation. So how much is the LCOE, for example, the levelized cost of electricity, and they're the numbers that I just quoted for renewables versus nuclear versus carbon capture and storage. What actually matters is the total cost of delivered electricity to the consumer, which includes many other things other than just the cost of generating the power. So, for example, here in Australia, the average wholesale price of electricity, so the cost of generation over the year for all generating assets, is around about $60 or $50 a megawatt hour, something like that. The cost of electricity paid by consumers, such as myself, is more like $300 a megawatt hour. The difference, of course, being the cost of all of the other things that are needed to be done to get electricity safely from the generator to my house, transmission, distribution, etc. Renewable energy at high penetration, and by high I'm talking about sort of 50% and above, creates difficulties for the grid operator because it doesn't have inertia. It doesn't provide the frequency control ancillary services that normal thermal power plants provide. It's not dispatchable, which means that you need to have backup capacity which will run when it's nighttime or when the wind isn't blowing. So essentially, what I'm saying is that in order to integrate very high levels of renewable energy into the grid, and I'm talking about high levels, sort of 50% or more, the sorts of levels that will make a material difference to emissions going forwards, you not only need to worry about the cost of the generating capacity, you need to worry about the cost of the additional backup capacity you're going to need to back it up, the cost of energy storage, because that will absolutely be part of the solution, the cost of probably additional transmission and distribution infrastructure, so that you can shift renewable energy around the grid when it's not windy in one place but it is windy in another place, for example, and we're probably going to need demand side management as well, which requires smart meters to be rolled out so that you can control demand, so that when renewable energy is not providing, you can reduce demand on the other side of the equation. So the total cost of the integration of non-dispatchable intermittent energy sources is actually significantly higher than you would believe if you just considered the cost of generation. There's a lot more to it than that. CCS and nuclear, for that matter, don't incur any of those additional costs. The total increase in the cost of your power will be reflected in the levelized cost of electricity, because that captures all of the additional things that you need to do. You don't require any backup, you don't require any storage, you don't require any additional transmission and distribution, you don't require any additional frequency control ancillary services. All of that stuff just comes with the power plant. As far as the grid is concerned, CCS is plug and play. There is no change. Of course, the other factor that is not really relevant to this specific discussion, but which is relevant to the broader question around why CCS, is that, of course, there are about 25% of emissions come from industrial processes, and for many of those emissions, there is no other option other than carbon capture and storage to deal with those emissions, because the CO2 is part of the process. It's not dependent upon the energy source. So the short answer to the question is, we actually do need to keep focusing on renewables. We need a lot more renewables, but every analysis that's ever been done always shows that you must have CCS as well. If you just rely on renewables, it will cost a lot more to achieve the same level of emissions reduction, and most likely it simply won't be achievable.
Thank you, Alex. And then I think this leads to the second question that we are talking about the cost and which technology specifically preferable. That's a question from our colleague from Brunei. Can you read that?
Yeah, I can. I've got that. So the question is, which CCS technology is preferable? Is it post-combustion? Is it pre-combustion, i.e. IGCC? Or is it oxy-fuel? Look, it really is too early to say. I think post-combustion capture, whether that be on conventional combustion or oxy-fuel combustion, is probably slightly ahead of pre-combustion capture at the moment, simply because there's a lot more experience with post-combustion capture. Of the 21 plants that will be operating by the end of next year, I think 20, there's only one. I think there's only one IGCC with CCS, so almost all of them are post-combustion capture facilities. So we've seen the greatest cost reduction. I didn't talk about this. I should have, with respect to the previous question. We've seen the greatest cost reduction come from post-combustion capture technologies, simply because there have been a lot more of them deployed, and we've learned a lot from their construction. However, there will be circumstances where the commerciality of a pre-combustion plant, an IGCC plant, will be superior because it can produce other products other than electricity. The advantage that IGCC has is that you can sell into other markets which tend to be higher margin. So you might be producing chemicals, you might be producing urea, you might be producing, all of the things that you can produce when you gasify coal, for example, which generally tend to be higher margin businesses. So the commerciality might be superior to PCC, which is on electricity only. Electricity tends to be a much lower margin business. Back to you, Benny.
Yes, Alex, thank you very much for that. And then now I think we are looking to the national perspective. There is also the question for the Indonesia ministry. That's because there is highlighting a lot of project that's in Indonesia. That's so the question that who will finance it? I mean, with the current limited financing from the international community, that's how the Indonesian government look into the issue on the financing. I think you can address it to Mr. Sri from Indonesia, please. Sri from Indonesia, can you respond to the question because on who will finance the 20 gigawatt project in Indonesia, that because a lot of restriction on the financing into on the coal power plant project right now, or World Bank and any others. So what do you take on this part?
Okay, thank you, Benny. Well, this is a very good question, of course, and it's very difficult to answer for me, but I'll try to explain about that. I think, can I have slide number 5, please?
number 5.
Well, number 5. It's the previous slide before the slide. Yes, this one. Well, as you may see here, that actually the 35. No. Number 5. Yes, thank you. Well, as you may see here, that 35 gigawatt program actually is started in 2010, 2010. So it's a long way before the Paris Agreement implemented. So I guess that some of the project which is already in construction or even already in commission is actually has got a financial backup before 2015. But of course, for the one who is still in planning stage, in the slide number 3, please. The red one, it's very challenging, I think, because they are still in planning, and it's they have to find a financial backup, and now as the Paris Agreement implemented, it's more difficult for them. But I think this is not only for coal fire plant, because we also have a gas fire power plant as well. For coal, I think it might come from the technology provider itself. So they have, let's say, like a package which is they provide the technology as well as the finance. But I think as far as if we apply the right technology, the cleaner technology, I think the financial backup is still there. But again, this is very challenging for them. Back to you, Benny.
Okay, thank you, Pak. As you highlighted, it's will be quite challenging for Indonesia on the issue of the financing. That's Benjamin. That's if you want, can I go back with you? That's I mean, from your international perspective, that after the Paris Agreement, yeah, there's some issue on the limitation. That's what do you advise for Indonesia, especially if they are going to HELE technology? That's where actually the Indonesia can tap the financing opportunity.
Thanks, Benny. Yeah, there are. I mean, it's an interesting and it's a difficult question in a way, because we see a number of private financial institutions globally now beginning to reduce their financing for coal, and I think that's both coal production and for coal-fired power generation capacity, and that's something that we need to challenge, particularly in the context, I think, of working to highlight that many countries have high efficiency coal as part of their INDCs, and what we should all be doing is trying to help implement the Paris Agreement, and therefore to help countries implement their INDCs. There is some very, I think, preliminary shifting towards some financial institutions beginning to recognize the INDCs as essentially one of the major tests. So I was at an event last week where one of the major Western banks that operates across Asia was actually highlighting the fact that if something's in an INDC or an NDC, that would be one of the hurdles it would have to overcome to get financing. So for countries that have included high efficiency coal in their INDC, then that should help access financing. One of the other things that's becoming interesting is I know that GE, for example, which is one of the major providers of this technology, is now coming to countries and others essentially with financing as part of their package. And so they're identifying opportunities as to how they can source financing and then bring that to the market. So say we're bringing you a power plant, but also the financing to help you pay for it, which is additionally interesting. And finally, I think we need to revisit and look at what's happening with the development banks. Recently, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank put out its energy strategy consultation, which was quite restrictive towards coal-fired power generation financing. I think that needs to be reviewed. and so we've put in a submission to that, and I'd encourage others to do so as well. But I think in the context of the new US administration, there is an opportunity to revisit some of the restrictions that have been put in place from an OECD export credits perspective, and also from the World Bank and similar tightening that seems to be happening at the Asian Development Bank. All those opportunities to have increased availability of financing. Of course, we know that the Japanese are continuing to support financing, particularly when Japanese technology is used, and that's been a case particularly in Indonesia. So there are a range of options for financing, but I think it's really trying to connect it to the INDCs in particular is probably one of the most important things. But this is also an area that I think we need to continue to work on, and I think it would be useful for ASEAN representing the countries of the region to actually look at the financing for this technology as well, because otherwise there is the risk that if the financing isn't available, then other technologies, such as subcritical technologies, will be built which have higher emissions of both CO2 and non-CO2 emissions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Benjamin. That's can go to the Dr. Pino. That's do you see also the same issue that's facing by Thailand on the financing issue, or because you are also expecting Thailand to increase its share of coal power plant? That's do you think Thailand is also dealing with the same issue on the financing on the coal power plant? Dr. Pino, please.
Yes. Okay. On the financing,
yes.
No, we don't have a problem of financing, but we have a problem of protest, right? And then, as you know, coal is cheap and price stability, right? And then we in Thailand we put our energy depend largely on coal. 70%, largely on natural gas. 70% of our power mix come from natural gas. Only 20% from coal, and the others, the rest is 10%. We put more. We are dependent on more natural gas. The gas in the Gulf of Thailand is now depleting. It's come less and less. We import about 25, one-fourth our gas for power generation from Myanmar. And then from now, if we cannot build coal-fired power plant in Thailand, what the next option would be either natural gas or renewable energy. If we put rely more on natural gas, it would be a risk for the country, right? When you put all of your egg in one basket, you take a risk. What's happened in 2009? We have a gas pipeline problem from Myanmar. The transportation of gas there's problem in the gas pipeline, and then the country nearly blacked out because of that incident. Nobody knows about this, and in Thailand, we don't. NGOs don't care about anything, but they care about just only environment. They don't care about the economy and then national security. And then we in Thailand, the government try to explain to them, but they don't. What they care is just only environment. They don't care about economy of the country, or they don't care about the security, the risk of the country. Right. This is not the problem of the financing in the coal. We can find finance to build a new coal-fired power plant. The problem in Thailand is the protest from NGOs, mainly supported by Greenpeace. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Pino. I think it leads to the point that I raised in the beginning, that where actually that's under the ASEAN plan of action for energy cooperation. That there is 4 key pillars that we are uh, trying to achieve, that the energy security, the accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. That is the way that ASEAN trying to look the context of energy in the region and also part of the world. With that, I think I'd like to thank you very much for all the speaker that who joined with us today, that bring a good perspective on ASEAN and coal and the direction on the Paris Agreement. That's before, I mean, we are already past our time. But before I close that, there's any additional comment from all of speaker that we have? Can start with you, Benjamin. Do you have any short closing for our webinar today?
Thanks. I just thought it was an interesting point just made by the speaker from Thailand there about needing to balance all 3 pillars of sustainable development: the economic, the social, and the environmental. And we often only focus on the environmental, but particularly in the ASEAN region, the economic and social are just as important and need to be focused on as well. And that's why I think coal is playing a role. So that would be my summary. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Benjamin. That's Alex. Do you have any short closing for our webinar today?
Look, just thank you very much. Sorry, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. I think it was a great discussion. I think the best option to take going forwards is the option which has the most options, if I can put it that way. Whether you're trying to achieve energy security, or whether you're trying to achieve lowest cost, or whether you're trying to achieve the best environmental outcome, all of the analysis, all of the modelling shows that you need every option to achieve the best outcome on those 3 fronts. No option should be off the table, and carbon capture and storage is one of those very important options. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And then Pak Sri, that's you have the last comment, Pak.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Penny, and all the speakers. I think this is very interesting discussion, and I hope I can share another topics in another discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Pa. And then Dr. Pino, your last comment, please.
Yeah, we are happy that in other ASEAN countries that you are very successful in promoting clean coal technologies for the coal-fired power plant. But in Thailand, we have some many problems to solve, because we face a problem. Actually, is because of the political turmoil in the past 10 years that make our country to be like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pino. I think there is also could be a base for us for future collaboration and all stakeholder in the region, and also our dialogue partner, international organization. And I think there is an option where we can more discuss with colleagues with World Coalition, and then also from the Global CCS Institute, that how the effort on national level would be in line with the effort on international perspective. For that, I would like to thank you very much for all the speakers. I'd like to thank you also for the participation from all the participants. We have a huge range of participants today. Australia, US, also from Europe is joining with us here in ASEAN. And then for the closing, that all material, the presentation, article, video recording, so there will be also a recording of this webinar will be available at the ACE website in the link that you can access in our website. And then also that you may access all the publication has been made by ACE on coal and also renewable energy, energy efficiency, and all the energy-related issue that we publish, that you can also access it for free at our website at aseanenergy.org/publication. And for inquiry and then for future collaboration on various activity in ACE and ASEAN context, and also for potential collaboration in the webinar. And the next year, there will be this will be a last webinar this year, but we will have more in the next year. So if you have any inquiry related to that, please contact to our communication officer with the address that you find in my slide. But for that, I ended our webinar today. Once again, thank you very much. Thanks for all, and have a great day. All right.